All right, so this is my presentation for the 30-hour observation paper and the 30 hours of observation. So the first slide is about the teacher as a collaborative partner, and I've broken this up. Basically, the whole presentation is broken up into one bullet point for each of the different librarians that I shadowed. So for this one, the teacher as a collaborative partner, first and foremost, there's the way that SLT help their teachers find books related to the lessons that they want to teach. So this is something that happened a lot in the elementary school that I shadowed. Teachers would come to the library and ask for help finding resources for their lessons, and the SLT would then find them and get them to them by a certain time or leave them out so they could pick them up. I actually helped the SLT grab some of them while I was there because they were a little bit behind schedule, and that was kind of cool. Then at the middle school level, I talked to the librarian about collaboration with teachers, and she talked about how she co-taught a lesson with the history classes in her school because the unit was on what she used to teach when she used to teach classes. And then the last thing that I included in the slide was collaboration outside the school community, because the SLT I shadowed at the high school level was actually working on collaborating with the public library in their town, so she could make it kind of connect the students in her high school to the public library and the resources that were there that they didn't necessarily have at the school library. The next slide is the school librarian's role in reading, and this one is again separated by the 3 education levels and 3 different schools I shadowed. So the first thing I wanted to mention were the way that the youngest school, the elementary school, ensured that the kids are checking out books. At this school, especially in the younger grades of this school, the students would go to the library for a story time, and after the story time, they would actually be required to check out a book. So they couldn't leave without checking a book, or at least renewing the book they had, or basically getting asked about whether or not they were returning the book if they didn't have it with them, and things like that. This was actually really interesting for the middle school when I talked to her about this. The SLT, because I talked to her after everything that happened with COVID-19, I did just a phone call with her. She talked about how she was actually making a book club, or trying to make a book club with her students for during COVID-19, so they could connect with each other and connect with her and still keep reading, even though everything has been very difficult for everyone. And so she was trying to organize it through Zoom or Skype or something, and she was trying to make sure it was for it was using books like Harry Potter or something that's made available by the publishers, which I thought was a really cool idea, and definitely an interesting take on the role of school librarians when it comes to reading, especially right now. And then the last thing I want to mention on this slide is at the high school level. The SLT would actually visit classrooms and for collaboration and lessons, as a lot of SLTs do. And when I shadowed at the high school level, she was giving the presentation to to one of the classes about the library in their town. So she'd brought in a school, one of the teen librarians from the public library in their town, and she brought them in, and they were talking about library cards and audiobooks, and funnily enough, they were talking about online, like checking out books online. This was before COVID-19, but that was a very interesting thing for the students to hear because they never really talked about that before. So the next section is teaching multiple literacies. In the elementary level, the SLT would focus on warm-up lessons where students would spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes looking up their daily word in the dictionary. Then they move on to the official lesson, which would either be like their essays or the hands-on project that they had to do. And then in the middle school, the SLT would do what I mentioned before, where she collaborated with the teachers, with the history teachers, and she would teach the lessons through essays and have them write an essay, have them do a presentation, kind of different forms of showing what they've learned. And at the high school level, she would, again, often go and collaborate because she wasn't actually teaching any classes this year. So she would just go and collaborate with lessons and give presentations and everything like that. For evidence of the practice of inquiry-based learning, in the younger group in the elementary school, she encouraged the students to present their findings for the in-class warm-ups. So she would have students raise their hand and share the definition if something went wrong, or if they had trouble finding it or anything. She would sit down and walk everyone through it and try to make sure that everyone was understanding what they were doing and was understanding how to use the dictionaries. At the middle school level, the SLT focused on communicating with the students and discussing what works and what doesn't work about her book club plan. So it's still in the works right now, but she's been talking to students, been talking to teachers, seeing whether or not students would feel enough productive enough to get something like this moving, because a lot of teachers have been talking about how students have just been not very productive during this time. And then at the high school level, from what I did see, which was her doing the presentation about the public library, she was constantly checking to make sure her students were following what she was doing, and the presentation about the school, about the public library. So for evidence of assessment and evaluation, the elementary level had a lot of administrative support. There was a lot of assessment and evaluation from the administration at the school, and she was actually often talked to about what was working and what wasn't. In both the middle and high school levels, the SLT put a lot of effort into communicating with their students and making sure the students were understanding and following the lessons, asking lots of questions, walking students through the lessons. In the high school level, I actually saw the SLT have a student guide her through the process of checking out a book as if she were checking out a book then and there, just to make sure she felt comfortable using it and that all the students felt comfortable using the online database. The next slide is the librarian's role for creating the learning environment, both physical and digital. And this one was really clear in all three of the schools. The SLT at the elementary school had actually been the one to redesign the entire library. So what she and the computer teacher decided to do was put a glass wall between the computer lab and the library. That way students could see that there were computers there and they had access to them throughout the day. And there were also lots of physical resources, lots and lots and lots of books. They could get books either from the library there, or if the students wanted to read a book from maybe another library that they didn't have at this library, in the school library, the teachers could actually reach out and get them, and they would be delivered on Tuesdays and returned the following Thursday, which was kind of interesting. In terms of the middle school, she provided digital and physical access in the library. She had lots of computers, lots of books. The space was actually made to be separated so there could be multiple classes going on at once. I think she said up to 3 classes at once, or big presentations of up to 200 people, which is a lot. And then in the high school level, they had lots and lots of computers. There were so many computers, but they also had something that they were working on, which was the makerspace, which would be for students to use. And they also had Macs and stuff, but the makerspace wasn't finished. I think it was supposed to be finished in May. I'm not sure how that's going to turn out now that everything's been happening with COVID-19, but our next slide is collection development and information access. So in the elementary level, there was a lot of weeding that was going on. So the librarian and her assistant were actually going through and trying to find books that were no longer being used or that they had too many copies of that weren't really getting checked out and didn't really need so many copies. So they would take those and donate them, or unfortunately throw them out. And they had me actually help find some of the books for that as well. And they also had permission slips because they were a younger school. So for kids who were maybe 9, 10, they'd actually have them bring a permission slip home if they wanted to read YA or young adult. So they weren't actually allowed to check out books without getting books from the older, with more mature themes, unless they got a permission slip signed by their parents. In the middle school, she tried to provide a safe learning environment for her students, where they were able to access what they wanted to while also being protected in the important ways that mattered. And at the high school level, they actually accepted every donation to their library no matter what, and would go through and try to find which ones they actually wanted to keep and which ones they were going to donate somewhere else. All three of these librarians actually didn't have a copy of their collection development plan that they could show me, but all of them either had one that was being reworked or one that was being in the process of being created. So they were all in the process of making them. And the last of the 8 roles, the librarian's role as a program administrator or leader. So in the elementary level, the SLT there actually stressed a lot about participation in school boards, which we talked about in class as well. She said that that was probably the most important thing she could do for her school, and to kind of show that she was a valuable member in her school community. So I think she was part of the history and English boards at her school. And she was very, very insistent that that is what you should do when you become a school library teacher. At the middle school level, she worked really closely with the administration to create the library into a space that was kind of a hub for the school. That was what she was hired to do, and to try to turn it into a place where students could go to learn, where teachers could go to teach, where presentations could happen, where a lot could go on. And in the high school level, she ran a lot of programs that would work out of the library and community nights. So one of the cool ones that was happening right when I went to shadow her was actually where they were doing like a candy building night, where people would come in and build scenes from their favorite books or movies or shows out of candy and marshmallows, which was really cute. There was an example of one from Stranger Things that was adorable. And in conclusion, what I really noticed was that there's a difference between grade levels. Only the school librarian in the elementary school actually was teaching classes. So she was the only one who was teaching classes, and I think she was teaching like 4. Both the SLTs in the middle and high school level talked about how they missed teaching classes and that they wished they were still teaching classes as well. Yeah, and there was also a huge difference in how the lower levels were focused more on trying to figure out what the kids wanted to read, while the SLTs in the older age levels were focused on making kids want to read again and helping them find books that they would want to read, as opposed to helping them figure out what maybe they liked or what genre they wanted to read. And here is my summary of learning. So first is 3 things that I learned. I've learned that SLTs are more than just librarians. They're teachers, advocates, leaders, and more in their community. I also learned that there are so many SLTs are actually really valued in the communities, in their school communities. A lot of what we've heard is negative things about librarians in schools, and seeing the SLTs I shadowed actually showed me just how valued they are in their community. A lot of them were hired to make change in their school community, which was really, really cool to see. And one last thing that I learned was that some SLTs don't have any classes to teach, which was definitely different than I expected. I actually thought that all school library teachers actually were teaching classes, which was a little bit of a shock to me, because in the higher grade levels, it seems like they don't teach as many classes. And 2 things that surprised me. One of them was that, one of them was that. But 2 other ones were that the librarians actually have a lot of freedom and flexibility in their day to do what they need to get done during the day and to do what they want to get done. And it also surprised me how fast-paced the days were. During the first day of my first shadow, I literally didn't even get a chance to eat lunch, which was kind of a surprise. Like, the day just went by, and suddenly both the SLT and I were walking out, and we were like, wait a second, neither of us ate lunch. Lastly, one question I still have is about time management and having a work-life balance. I'm curious to know how it can be done in such a demanding, stressful job, because even when I asked all the SLTs I shadowed, none of them had a work-life balance. None of them were able to talk to me about how they had one, because it was very difficult. It's a very difficult job, and you often have to take it home with you. Yeah, and here's my bibliography.